Ciao a tutti amici. Oggi vi posto il documentario su Bernard Eugene Giles, stupratore e serial killer della Florida alla fine del 1973. Dopo il suo arresto nel dicembre dello stesso anno, ha ammesso pienamente la sua colpa ed è stato condannato a diversi ergastoli nel 1974. Mettetevi comodi, inserite i sottotitoli e godetevi il documentario.
The room was cold, the walls bare except for a single light flickering above. Across the table sat a man, hands cuffed, his eyes steady, unreadable. Officers watched him, waiting for hesitation, a sign of guilt, maybe even a glimpse of remorse. But there was none. Bernard Eugene Giles was calm. Too calm. He didn't shift in his seat. He didn't fidget. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't nervous. He sat there as if this was just another conversation, another moment in his day, like none of it mattered. The detective leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Do you understand what you're being charged with?" He gave a slow nod. No emotion. "You killed them, didn't you?" There was a pause. Then, without hesitation, Giles answered,
"Yes."
No excuses. No panic. No struggle to find the right words. Just a simple answer, spoken in the same way someone might confirm their own name. For months, young girls had been disappearing. Some were found, their bodies left in the woods, in orange groves, their lives taken without mercy. Others were never seen again. Families searched. The town whispered. Fear spread, but no one knew who was behind it. No one suspected him. Bernard had a wife, a daughter, a job. He lived like anyone else, went to work, paid his bills, came home. To the outside world, he was ordinary. But when he gets behind the wheel of his car, when he sees a young girl on the side of the road, alone, everything changes. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of lost control. He knew what he was doing. And when the police finally caught up with him, when they looked into his eyes and asked the question that had haunted so many, why? He gave them an answer they weren't ready for. What makes a man like this? Was he born this way? Or did something push him to it? Stay with me as we go through this true crime story, and please tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Bernard Eugene Giles was born in 1953 in Titusville, Florida. From the outside, his childhood seemed ordinary. No history of abuse, no violent household. His parents followed the rules, worked hard, and stayed out of trouble. But inside those walls, something was missing. Affection, connection, understanding. His home wasn't filled with love, but it wasn't filled with fear either. It was just empty. People who knew him back then described him as quiet, polite, easy to get along with. A normal kid. A kid who smiled, played, and did what was expected of him. But there were signs, small things that no one paid attention to. Things that, looking back now, seem impossible to ignore. By the time he was 6 years old, Bernard played differently than other kids. While most children ran around pretending to be heroes, he played games where he pretended to kill. He would act out strangulations, wrapping his small hands around another child's throat, holding on just long enough to feel control before letting go. To him, it wasn't scary. It wasn't wrong. It was fun. No one thought much of it. Kids have wild imaginations. They play rough. They don't always know the difference between pretend and real. But Bernard knew. As he grew older, his interests shifted. In school, he showed talent in visual arts, drawing, and painting with an eye for detail. It was something he was good at, something that made him stand out, but he didn't care. The passion faded quickly, replaced with boredom. His grades slipped. He stopped showing up. Teachers noticed, but there was no real intervention. By 16, he dropped out of school completely. His future could have gone in many directions, but he found work as an electrician, a trade that gave him a steady income, a way to build a life. In 1972, at just 19 years old, He got married to a 17-year-old girl named Leslie Jo, and a year later, in July of 1973, they had a daughter. He became a young husband, a father, a man with responsibilities. From the outside, it looked like he was settling down, starting fresh, creating a future. But what no one saw, what no one even thought to question, was what was happening behind his eyes. Bernard wasn't a man on the edge. He wasn't someone battling with urges, struggling to hold himself back. He knew exactly who he was. And the life he built, the family he had, none of it changed that. He didn't fight his darkness. He embraced it. And before the year was over, 5 girls would lose their lives because of it. Did marriage hide who he really was? Or was it just another mask he wore? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The summer of 1973 should have been a turning point in Bernard's life. He had a wife, a newborn daughter, and a steady job. Most men his age were working hard to provide for their families, planning for the future, figuring out how to navigate adulthood. But Bernard had no such concerns. He didn't dream of a better life or a bigger home. He wasn't thinking about his child's future or his wife's happiness. He was thinking about killing. For years, the fantasies had played in his mind. He had imagined the moment, rehearsed it over and over again. Now, the waiting was over. Now it was real. His victims were chosen carefully, but without hesitation. Young, vulnerable, alone. Most were hitchhikers, girls and women who trusted strangers to get them where they needed to go. This was the 1970s. Hitchhiking was common, and fear wasn't as deeply ingrained in people as it is today. The first girl got in his car thinking she would reach her destination safely. She never did. 18-year-old Nancy Jerry disappeared on a late September night. She was last seen hitchhiking, standing on the side of the road, waiting for someone to stop. Bernard pulled up, rolled down the window, and offered her a ride. She got in. No one knows what those first few minutes were like. Did they talk? Did he pretend to be friendly? Or did the air change the moment the door closed? What's certain is that Nancy never had a chance to escape. Her body wasn't found for over 2 months. When authorities discovered her, she was still fully clothed, her remains left in a palmetto thicket. A single gunshot wound to the head. Executed. Just over a month later, 14-year-old Sharon Mary Weimer vanished. A child. Innocent. Barely old enough to understand real danger. When she was found, she was almost unrecognizable. She had been strangled. Her body left with nothing but a St. Christopher's necklace around her neck, a symbol of protection, a symbol that had failed her. Her shirt and sweater were discarded nearby, as if they meant nothing. 9 days later, another girl was gone. 14-year-old Krista Jean Melton, reported missing in mid-November. She wasn't found until January 31st, 1974, months after she had been taken. Her fate was the same. A single gunshot wound to the head. Another life erased without hesitation. One day after Krista disappeared, 17-year-old Carolyn Jan Bennett was gone too. A teenager with her whole life ahead of her, unaware that a predator was watching, waiting, ready to take what he wanted. On Christmas Day, when families were celebrating, opening gifts, and sharing meals, Carolyn's family received the worst news imaginable. Her remains had been found. Like the others, she had been shot in the head. Discarded. Forgotten. 2 days later, the oldest of his known victims was taken. 22-year-old Paula Darlene Hamrick. She wasn't shot like the others. She was strangled. Her hands were bound. She was left completely naked. Her body was found just 8 days after she vanished. Unlike the others, the evidence suggested that Paula fought. She struggled. She didn't go quietly. Maybe that's why he chose a different method. Maybe, for the first time, he wanted to feel what it was like to have complete control, to watch the life drain from someone's eyes slowly, deliberately. Maybe it wasn't about the kill. Maybe it was about the power. By the time November ended, 5 young women were dead. The community was on edge, but no one knew a serial killer was among them. The disappearances seemed random. The bodies weren't all found right away. Some were missing for months before the truth was discovered. There was no warning, no clear pattern. No one had any idea that the friendly young electrician, the husband, the father, was the monster they were all afraid of. And Bernard? He wasn't worried. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He didn't think he would ever get caught, but he made a mistake, and it would cost him everything. December 10th, 1973. Bernard was hunting again. This time, he found two girls. They were young, underage. They were hitchhiking, trusting that the man behind the wheel was just another stranger willing to help. But Bernard didn't want to help. He took them to the woods outside Titusville, the same type of place where he had taken his other victims, the same isolated area where no one would hear them scream. But this time, something changed. The girls resisted. They fought. They didn't make it easy. Bernard pulled out his gun, ready to kill, but it malfunctioned. He tried again, but this time he misfired. This became a second chance for the girls. They ran for their lives. They made it to the police. They described everything, the car, the man, even his name. Less than 24 hours later, Bernard was arrested. And thankfully his killing spree was over. At first, the charges were attempted assault and rape. But detectives already had suspicions. Too many girls had gone missing. Too many bodies had turned up in the same way. And the forensic evidence didn't lie. When police searched his car, they found his .22 caliber pistol. Ballistics confirmed what they feared most. It was the same weapon used to kill Nancy Jerry. The net was closing in. And Bernard? He didn't fight it. He sat in the interrogation room, looked the detective in the eye, and confessed. He admitted to everything. All 5 murders. The attempted murders. The attacks no one had even known about. He talked about his childhood, his fascination with strangulation, the games he played as a kid, the urges he had always felt. He told them exactly who he was. And the most disturbing part? He had never once felt remorse. A man with no history of abuse. A man raised in a law-abiding home. A man with a wife, a daughter, a career. So why? Why did he kill? Was it something in his mind? Something in his soul? Something that had always been there, waiting to be set free? Or was Bernard a proof that some people are simply born without conscience? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. A day ago, he had been a free man, confident, certain that no one would ever catch him. Now, he was in handcuffs. His wife, his daughter, his entire life gone. Bernard Eugene Giles wasn't just suspected in 5 murders. He was investigated in connection to 11 disappearances. 11 young women who had vanished between August and November of that year. Had he really killed only 5? Or were there more bodies waiting to be found? Detectives listened as Bernard described his own mind. And then, he said something that made their blood run cold. I never wanted to stop. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about power, control, and worst of all, he would have kept going if he hadn't been caught. If his gun hadn't misfired that night, he would have taken 2 more lives. And he would have killed again. News of Bernard Eugene Giles' arrest spread quickly. People were horrified. This wasn't some drifter. This wasn't a stranger. This was a local man, a husband, a father, a neighbor, someone they had trusted. The realization hit hard. A serial killer had been living among them, and no one had known. With his full confession, prosecutors had everything they needed. But they wanted the death penalty. Bernard Eugene Giles wasn't just any killer. He had preyed on teenage girls, children who had trusted him. He had shown no remorse. He had spoken about his crimes with no emotion. The state of Florida wanted justice. And for Giles, justice meant death. Bernard knew what was coming. He knew a trial meant the electric chair. So, he made a deal. Just before his trial was set to begin, he pled guilty to all 5 murders. And in exchange, the death penalty was taken off the table. Now this is what baffles me. How can a killer be afraid of death? Is this not strange? On August 13th, 1974, Bernard Eugene Giles was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. For the families of the deceased, it wasn't enough. Their daughters were gone. And Bernard? He would get to live. But at least, they knew one thing for certain. He would never walk free again. For 5 years, Bernard Eugene Giles sat behind bars. Then, in October 1979, he tried to escape. It wasn't a reckless attempt. It was planned. He and 2 other inmates created smoke bombs to distract the guards and the prison docs. They worked for months, using locksmithing tools to cut a small gap in the fences. And one night, they ran. Bernard Giles was free, but not for long. police immediately put out an alert. They had a strong suspicion of where he might go. His ex-wife's house. They believed he wanted to take his daughter and disappear. But they never gave him the chance. Just 5 miles from the prison, Bernard was caught. 26 hours after escaping, he was back behind bars. This time, there was no getting out. An additional 15 years were added to his sentence. Today, Bernard is still alive, still serving his time in a Florida prison. But his story serves as a warning. He wasn't a man with a traumatic past. He wasn't a man driven by revenge or hatred. He was a man who killed because he wanted to. And that is what makes him truly terrifying. What do you think? Was Bernard Eugene Giles born evil? Or did something turn him into the monster he became? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, before his failed breakout, he was already never going to see the outside world again. But now, he was locked down even tighter. He was moved to a higher security facility. Every step, every movement, every interaction was monitored. Bernard was no longer a threat to society. Or was he? Even behind bars, his story wasn't over. If Bernard had managed to stay on the run, what would have happened? Would he have tried to start over, living under a new identity? Or would the killer inside him have resurfaced? Would there have been new victims? Let me know what you think in the comments. Decades had passed since Bernard had last seen the outside world. The man who once stalked the streets of Florida, hunting young girls, was now a ghost of his former self, locked away in a prison cell. Most people had forgotten his name. But in 2019, that changed. British journalist Piers Morgan walked into Florida State Prison with a single goal: to sit face-to-face with a convicted serial killer and find out what truly drove him to kill. What he found was terrifying. By the time of the interview, Bernard had spent over 40 years in prison. Most people would expect time to change a man, to dull the sharp edges of his crimes, to bring some level of regret. But that wasn't Bernard. Sitting across from Piers Morgan, he spoke about his crimes with an unsettling level of calm. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. He didn't try to make excuses. Instead, he admitted the truth. I didn't kill because I lost control. I killed because I wanted to, he said, and with that single sentence, the world saw Bernard for exactly what he was. A man who never stopped being a predator. Even decades behind bars, he was still dangerous. The interview with Piers Morgan reignited a major debate. By giving Bernard a platform, were we learning from the mind of a killer? Or were we giving a murderer exactly what he wanted: attention? Some argue that understanding men like Bernard helps prevent future crimes. Others say that serial killers should be erased from history, left to rot in their cells without a voice. So, what do you think? Should killers like Bernard be allowed to give interviews? Let me know in the comments. As we wrap up this story of Bernard Eugene Giles, we're left with one question that lingers in the mind. How could a man live two completely separate lives? By day, he was just a family man, a husband, a father, an electrician. But by night, he was something far darker, a cold-blooded killer preying on vulnerable young girls. The contrast is devastating. How could someone so capable of horrific violence hide behind the facade of a normal life? Bernard's story is a reminder of how dangerous the world can be, even in places where you least expect it. But the question remains, what creates a serial killer? Is it something in their genes, something they're born with? Or is it something they're shaped into, through their upbringing, their experiences, or their environment? We see clues to his darkness from a young age, violent tendencies, a twisted fascination with control. But could anyone have seen it coming? And here's one final question for you. Would you have gotten into his car? It's hard to imagine anyone putting themselves in the shoes of these victims, but it's worth considering the risks we face when we trust strangers. I want to hear your thoughts on this case, on what makes someone like Bernard turn into a killer, and whether anything could have been done to stop him. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime cases like this one. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and reminds us of the dark realities hidden in our world. Until next time, stay safe.